Welcome, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Dudley Edwards had 3 children and 5 grandchildren. Today we have 2 of his granddaughters with us, Dr Sara Parvis of Edinburgh University, a specialist in patristics, and obviously Neasa MacErlean, journalist and author of the book we're all here to celebrate. We also have the recently retired judge for the Supreme Court, John MacMenamin, a pupil of Dudley. I'm ligging in at the end, a pal of Neasa's. We work together on some creative projects, specifically around fake news, fake facts and archiving, under the tagline, "The future of history is screwed." But we would like to welcome you tonight. There are many people who knew Dudley, students, colleagues, friends, no enemies, of course. So Dudley's life story was very far removed from being the story of a man working alone. He inspired people who worked with him and people who he never met, people who went to university and people who never went. As such, I would like to particularly welcome these people from the learned establishments. I'm going to start off with UCD. Thank you. We'll go with the University of Galway next.
Yes.
There we go. So far winning Galway, well done. UCC. Trinity. Moving on, Trinity. That's it. What about Queen's? And I know we have somebody from the Irish Society of Archives mixing in amongst us. We have Notre Dame, I believe, Dublin City University, Maynooth, UL, University of Limerick, Mary Immaculate, Dublin Technical University, History Teachers Association of Ireland, and Ulster University. And last, but by no means least, Reading University. So we greet alumni from institutions in particular because the story of this book could be rephrased as liberation through education. Irish people getting themselves educated, setting a course for themselves and for the country. And Dudley was a leader in that. With that, I'm going to pass you over to John MacMenamin, who's going to talk for about 10 minutes, John.
If I get to 10 minutes. I feel an intense sense of imposter syndrome. I feel an intense sense of imposter syndrome because I know that there are so many other people here who are so well qualified, much better qualified, to speak about Dudley and about this great book. I can only say in my defence I was volunteered into it. I named the guilty man, James Maguire, the guilty woman, Neasa. And I can only say that I'm here as a kind of delegate, a kind of representative for all the students of Dudley over so many years and all the colleagues of Dudley. And when I say students, I'm referring to hundreds of students when you actually think about it. Who was Dudley Edwards? What did he achieve? I should be doing this in a slightly higher voice. And why does it matter so much? That's the way Dudley used to do it. And it's a remarkably effective way of getting people's attention. And Neasa has given us the answers to all those questions in this super book. Dudley actually, although he was extremely famous, was something of an enigma. His early life was marked by tragedy and sadness. He had extraordinary parents, and he must have been involved in conflict and known conflict from a very early time in his life. And there isn't one of us now who doesn't remember the first time we saw Dudley. The billowing hair, sailing like a sailing ship in some ways, the penetrating voice, the basilisk stare, the oracular comment, and always the sense of danger, implicit or explicit. And did he have flaws? Yes, he did. We know that. The book describes them. But he was, one of the things I think that the book really emphasises is the extent to which Dudley was, without being too pretentious about using the words avant la lettre, but Dudley was a public intellectual. He took risks. One of the headings of the chapters is he took huge risks. He devoted 5 years of his life, supported by Sheila, to literally engaging in a campaign of propaganda for history. And he became ultimately professor. At the age of 35, people say of Alexander the Great that when he reached the age of 33 or 34, he had no new worlds to conquer. By the time Dudley had reached the age of 35, he was a professor in UCD. He was PhD, D.Lit, member of the Royal Irish Academy, fellow of the Royal Historical Society. And in a sense, maybe Dudley had no other worlds to conquer because he'd achieved so many of his great ambitions. But when we think about Dudley, what is his biggest achievement? I think his greatest achievement was creating in Ireland a historical awareness and a historical consciousness that there was not before. An awareness which was propagated not through influential people who worked in the public service, although there were so many of those, not through the people in the media, although there were so many of those, but most of all through teachers who he taught, who in turn taught so many other students about history. And when you think about that, it's an extraordinary legacy. So he created the history school in UCD. I'm delighted to see people from the history school in UCD here today. He created a clear vision of the past. He had an extraordinary impact, I think, on each and individual person that he met. He was a student and a teacher. And when we think of the UCD History School, I think we have to, I use that in the two senses of the word. The School of History, that is the institution, but also the school, the historical school, sometimes inaccurately called revisionism. And I hope I'm not being unduly patriotic about the history department when I say that Donald McCartney had a great phrase that UCD was a national idea. But I think it's the UCD History School that created the ethos for that national idea, that set the mood. And when you think of what Dudley and Desmond did, starting from almost nowhere, just himself and Mary Hayden, it's an extraordinary achievement. This book, Neasa, is a wonderful tribute to Dudley. It's impartial, as Dudley would expect, affectionate. It's harrowing and sad in parts. It has heroes and heroines, Dudley, Sheila, Neasa, and other people who played heroic roles also. And while sometimes Dudley looked like a ship in full sail, life was not plain sailing with Dudley, and the ship was sometimes encountered rocky water. He had foibles, he had idiosyncrasies, he had feuds, and he had flaws. The best, I can't resist telling one story from the book because it's so good. His feud with D.A. Vinci over the foil fisheries case. Vinci was not pleased that he was bested by Dudley, and when it came to his own Vinci's retirement, he was being presented with a splendid 7 volumes of early Irish history, his masterwork, and he was asked how would he like it to be bound, and he said, "I would like it to be bound with the hide of Dudley Edwards." The thickest and most impenetrable hide in Ireland. sorry for stealing that from the book. It'll encourage you to read the book more. But there are many such great stories. And yet the paradox about Dudley, the man with the thickest and most impenetrable hide, was that he was, as even Clark once said, rather shy, a shy historian, and sometimes diffident about writing. Ronan Fanning, who we remember today, described historians as being a pessimistic profession. I'm not surprised, Joe, that Ronan described historians as being a pessimistic profession, because he tended to be a bit pessimistic sometimes himself. Dudley, on the other hand, had his periods of out depression and downs, but when you think about his life, and you think about the School of History, and then after that, archives, his other great achievement. And when I talk about history consciousness, he also created archives consciousness in this country by speaking to Éamon de Valera, by speaking to Garrett Fitzgerald, by inducing the government of the day to introduce legislation on archives. And the fact that we have archives, a real archives consciousness now, is very much due to Dudley. Neasa, we're hugely indebted to you for having written this book. It's an immensely revealing book. It teaches us an awful lot about Dudley. One of the things, I've never accused Dudley of being scrupulous, but I think he actually suffered from historical scruples about writing. I came across something he wrote when he was talking about the agenda of Irish history. And he said, he was talking about male historians in the 1970s. The historian must do his own thing. And he describes the threefold operation that a historian has to carry out: assessing his source material, constructing his historical edifice, and delimiting his topic. But then he went on to describe 11 steps, questions that historians had to ask themselves before they embarked on dealing with the topic. That's quite a thing if you actually reflect on it. 11 questions that every historian should ask. So, our debt today is to Neasa. Like your grandfather, your work is loyal, loving, impartial, brave, and even a little sentimental. Occasionally and necessarily it speaks by way of education. It deals with the written Dudley and the oral Dudley. The oral Dudley with created sparks, an electric Dudley. Short circuits, interconnections, connections that were never seen or perceived before. And you do it, Neasa, with almost the detachment of inverted commas scientific history. I speak for, I hope, all of us here and everyone who is speaking with Dudleys, and I say thank you for having written this wonderful book. I think that towards the end of it, there's a summary. Somebody summarized it. And Neasa quotes Sheila, saying that marriage to Dudley had been difficult, but in all it had been a privilege. I go so far as to say that was probably a good description about writing the book, that it was difficult but a privilege. I'd say, in one sense, it reveals the extent to which Dudley we hardly knew you, and in another sense, thanks to Neasa, now we do. And the best thing I can say, Neasa, is that Dudley would be proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next, Dr. Sara Parvis from John Dudley Edwards' granddaughter. Robert Dudley's granddaughter. This is good.
Well, when Neasa asked me to do this, hang on, there are all these recordings of me around the place, being sort of peering over the top of my laptop because I'm quite titchy. So, first of all, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, if you stop, what you have to do is, I have lots of friends who are in their 80s, and old-fashioned hearing aids allowed you to turn them up and turn them down. And a Dominican friend of mine, Columba Ryan, used to ostentatiously turn his hearing up and say, "I can't hear!" So please do ostentatiously turn your hearing aids up and shout, "I can't hear!" Or the equivalent in Dublin or Cork or whatever your accent is. That was Columba Ryan's. Well, when Neasa asked me to speak, she said, "Don't say nice things about the book, it's always really boring when people do that." So I'll only do that third. So I'll say two quick things first. First, on behalf of my father. Now, my father is 87, Owen Dudley Edwards, so the middle of the three children. He sends his love, of course, to Neasa. He hasn't yet read the book, because I pinched his copy of it, the copy that Neasa sent him, when I said I would come and do this. He's delighted that the book has been written, and he contributed to it, but he found it very painful. So he found it very difficult. And I will just mention, we're the kind of side that got away of the family, if you like, got away to Scotland, on the advice of Auntie Bessie, the sister-in-law. And as a consequence, I really hardly knew Dudley. But we saw him a couple of times when we were children. He died when I was at university at the age of 19, and I never knew him as an adult at all. So one thing I'll come back to in a second is that Neasa has given me Dudley in a way that I never had him as a friend before. I'll just say that my father's comment on his father was that he agreed with him about almost everything on the subject of history and disagreed with him about almost everything else. Those of you who knew my father, will know a lot of the history there, but he's delighted at the chance to relearn and to be part of the rethinking. And I think you can see from the book the journey that's happened since his death and then since his reevaluation in the 2000s, but the reevaluation that's happening in Irish history again now. And I think those three stages are all, this book has something to say to all of them. So I'll just say about myself. Well, I've always thought that, it's really about Neasa. I teach early Christian history. I'm the other writer in our generation of the grandchildren of Dudley. I do early Christian history, patristics. I'm the madly religious one of the five of us. So one of the great advantages that reading Neasa's book has given me is I've always wondered, on the Feast of All Souls, what do I say to make my contribution to pray him out of purgatory, if he's in purgatory, which some of the evidence seems to suggest he might be, or at least might have spent some time doing. And now this makes a sort of perfect example of things that I can add to my prayers. It does many, many other things as well. But I've always thought that my family are, that's my 4 minutes up, but I'll just finish that. My family contain a large number of people who are very careful historians, use the sources, use the facts, think very carefully about what they say. It also contains many people who never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And the trouble is, they're the same people. Now, when I said this to Neasa, she said, "Leave me out of that, that's not true of me." And after having read this book, I have to say, absolutely, it is not true of her. She's a different and much sharper sort of historian than most of us. She brings in this trained high-level journalism, not the sort of journalism that that Augustine would consider as rhetoric instead of philosophy, but the kind of journalism you can consider a sort of philosophy where the love of truth is what actually drives it. Now, I won't say very much about the book now, but just other than what I've said, that I feel it's given me back my grandfather as a human being, and indeed as a religious subject, as a religious friend. But I also feel that it's given me a new vision of history. And in fact, it's given me a new ambition, I must say, because like my father, who didn't become a professor, and I'm not yet a professor at the age of 57, because we both just enjoy paddling around too much in the fun of all sorts of different ideas. And Neasa has made me think, actually, I ought to have the ambition to do a little bit more than that. And that's all I'll say about this book, other than it's really absolutely brilliant. And I would never have thought that anybody could write a book as good as this on a subject as difficult as this. It could have been an Irish misery memoir. It could have been, I mean, some of the things that I read, just my jaw dropped. But, and I'm utter admiration for Neasa's keen eye and the way she's risen above all this. I mean, I'm utter admiration for that, but also above all for the achievement of the book. So all I can do is do this thing she asked me not to do, and say, it's a brilliant book, please buy it and read it.
Thank you, Sarah. And finally, Neasa, once we get the computer sorted.
Yeah. Oh, great. Perfect. Great.
Check your levels.
Is the level okay? I'm not used to speaking to these. Yeah. Can I move it over here?
You're taller than I am, so you might want to move it up.
I was in England. Can I move over here? Can you hear if I speak from here? Yeah. No. Okay, yeah.
You can take the microphone off the stand and hold it for her.
Well, it looks a bit tight.
Okay, yeah. I was in England a few weeks ago, and I had about 10 copies of the book sent ahead to friends and people who had helped me with it over there. And I was particularly interested to find out, was it actually readable in England? I wasn't sure that it was. And it turned out that it was very readable in England, not for everyone, probably, but maybe half the people that I'd sent it to read it quite quickly and gave me feedback. And there was one group who was saying that it actually taught them about Irish history. And they wanted to know, because even getting on for 100 years after Dudley discovered that the English didn't know about Irish history, I thought things would have improved. But no, they were fascinated by it. The second reason that people were interested was to find out the founding narrative of a relatively new state. And then there was another reason that two of my friends mentioned to me separately, and we had a conversation about this, and they were both quite shocked and sad, and one from Australia and the other from the Midlands in England. And what the conversation was, were we also slightly brainwashed in the history that was taught to us? And they were sad about that, because it had actually affected their whole lives in a way. One of these two friends, Sandra, had never really been able to participate in any of the sort of pomp and circumstance, not even Poppy Day in Britain, even though she'd lived there for decades. And yes, I think in most countries, history was used probably as some kind of indoctrination to some degree, and it was this that Dudley and the great Theo Moody were trying to change, and trying to get people to think for themselves, because the sort of history that they'd been brought up on was using these kinds of phrases. History was about inculcating patriotic spirit, particularly into young men, so that they would be ready to make the self-sacrifice when called upon by their country to do so. And Dudley and Moody, they were still I would say, loyal to Ireland, very patriotic, but they wanted people to understand the full story and to be able to judge for themselves. And to be honest, they hoped that young men wouldn't throw their lives away and throw away the lives of other people too. And of course, this meant that it wasn't easy to tell the truth. It was somewhat dangerous to tell the truth. It's no coincidence that in the early 40s, actually I was consulting with Sara on this, there was a raging debate in Ireland, particularly through the pages of Irish Historical Studies, which Dudley and Moody had founded in 1938, a raging debate about St Patrick and whether he'd actually existed and whether there were two of them. And that was partly because people could communicate with each other about it. But you can imagine how there are far more people here, there are many people here who know far more about this than I do, but you could be a bit nervous if you were the Catholic Church, and this was on the agenda thanks to Robert Dudley Edwards and Theo Moody and friends. And then also all sorts of other difficult stories like the Great Famine. What were the other reasons, the causes for the Great Famine? Not just pointing the finger to the British. And as and 1916, and we could go on with hundreds of other issues. So telling the truth is dangerous is a bit of a plot summary, I guess, for the book. But when we were in December over in Santa Cruz, which the capital of Tenerife, I was putting in the last changes to the manuscript, and we were reading that great newspaper El País, and they're coming up for 50-year celebration, and they're running these full-page declarations of what their values are, and one of them was truth unites those who seek her, and I found that immediately very touching, and I think truth unites those who seek it. That's why we're here tonight. Because this story isn't just a story about one man. It's not even a story about two men bringing in Theo Moody. It's because the ideas that they were putting out were believed in by hundreds of their students and their colleagues, and the hundreds turned into thousands. And here we are, as this message still rolls down the generations, 118 years after Moody was born in Belfast, and 116 after Dudley was born not too far away from here. And the message, I guess, is about seeking objectivity, and also it's about trying to understand what our old enemies feel. I'm pointing at Michael Laffin, who was making this point at the MacMenamin. And it's especially important now in this world today. Dudley is a person who just doesn't seem to go out of date to me. When I'm thinking about how to talk about Dudley, I can talk about Gaza, I can talk about so many issues, because actually there are parallels between Ireland then and Gaza now, or whatever. But in this world where we're seeing far more propaganda in a time of increasing conflict, the propaganda goes up just as the conflict goes up, and the fake facts proliferate. And Susan's been working on fake facts and the idea of fake history, which sounds like a bit of a joke, but actually it's not, unfortunately. Just a very minor deviation on this. I mean, I myself set up a journal called Robotics Law Journal about 10 years ago, and one of the first things that we looked at was algorithms. And the war that just started on June the 13th, Israel into Iraq, was partly based on algorithms, artificial intelligence, and the way you define them. Huge numbers of data being analysed to find particular patterns, and it seems as if that analysis was actually wrong. So we've had a war, which has partly been caused by unfortunate use of data. And just to give you, just a reference on that, because this isn't just me thinking this. Alistair Crook, the Dublin-born former British diplomat and MI6 agent for 30 years. He's the person who's been speaking about this during the week, and the use of these statistics by the International Agency for Atomic Energy, the authority on that. Anyway, so excuse my slight deviation there, but Dudley, when he was talking about what the role of a historian was, talked about one of the small services to mankind that the study of history can offer is to break down prejudice that has survived from the past. Prejudice is stereotypes, and it will include in further analysis, faulty algorithms and artificial intelligence, as well as the old traditional type of stereotype that we're used to. Actually, this book to me, I guess it's come at a time. It celebrates the universities, particularly UCD, but other universities, and it's come at a time when universities are under threat around the world. Harvard, for obvious reasons, and the other universities in the States who don't toe the line and maybe give in on some of their independence. And also in Britain, unfortunately, because the model for financing the British university has meant that over 70% of British universities are predicted to be in deficit by the end of this year. So in the English-speaking world, academic world, and non-English speaking too, well, the Irish universities just increasingly play a more important part and hang the lamp up there for academic independence. I just wanted to give some examples also about how Dudley's the Dudley Moody message continues to run today, including among the activities of people here tonight. So there's someone here who didn't actually study under Dudley, but became an archivist, and then was chair of the Irish Society for Archives for 20 years. That's Reginald Ruffosay. And there's someone here who is the current editor of the newsletter for the Irish Society for Archives, voluntary post. And she knew Dudley and worked with him, and that's Dr. Mary Clark. Then there's the gang of AC2. That's four of Dudley's early colleagues in archives who are still meeting each other decades after they first met for lunch regularly. And Kerry Holland and the others are here tonight. I'd just say, just add that bit in really, because Dudley in friendship, he was a bit of a funny character sometimes, but the friendships, many of the friendships really lasted and last to this day. I'd like to mention just briefly issues related to Brexit as in activities of people here. Stephen Collins, Dudley's student, UCD history, who wrote Navigating Brexit, the book that talks about how the Irish actually overplayed not overplayed, but really rose to the challenge and sorted out what was going to be a potentially very difficult situation for the EU and for Ireland, and somehow managed to turn it positive. And it's a clear-eyed view of history, I believe, that helped make those negotiations so positive. And I don't know if he's here tonight, but yeah, I think as a journalist I always feel slightly embarrassed mentioning a civil servant's name. You're not really supposed to do it. So if Rory Montgomery's here, if he could just put his hand over his ears. Because he was the civil servant who was negotiating the Brexit deal with his colleagues. I'd like to mention the essay competition, which was put on by four barristers who were students of Dudley, John Finlay, Kevin Cross, John MacMenamin, and we all miss Adrian Hardiman. John MacMenamin was also involved in the campaign to keep history as a compulsory subject in schools beyond the age of 11. And that was won, that battle, and a very difficult battle it was. Deirdre McMahuna is here, representing the History Teachers Association of Ireland and all the other teachers here. That was a great battle to win. I just want to mention other historians, and I'll actually start with two people in the other side of my family, the MacErlean side of my family, who also investigate the past, and that is Richard Keenan and Dr Thomas MacErlean, who are here tonight. Joyce Padbury can't be here, but without her, this book wouldn't. It's not that it wouldn't have been written; it wouldn't even have been thought of. And Pat Howraken is here, and she was Dudley's student and once an expert on heraldry, and she was the one. I remember her sitting on a high stool in Doheny and Nesbitt, and she said to me, where many great ideas have developed, and she said to me, "You could write this book," which was a real shock for me, I can tell you, at the time. And the person who helped me turn that into something was Deirdre McMahon, who can't be here tonight, but she actually pointed me towards the 70 boxes of archives at UCD, and then I thought, well, actually, maybe I could do something there. And I've written 100,000 words or so in this book, 100,000 words that survived, but I still lack the words to say to Professor James Maguire, thank you for everything you did. I can't quite get those words right. He was known by so many as the backbone of the UCD history department. I'm sure I'm really embarrassing him now, but there are people nodding here, so I'm afraid you have to accept some of this, James. and he agreed to read the chapters and gave me a great deal of help and explained all sorts of things to me, how like the penal laws at the end were quite different to the penal laws at the start and things like this, which I needed to understand. But he actually took a risk on a financial journalist who'd spent most of her life in England and who'd stopped studying history at the age of 18, but who had, when learning history, been taught about the admirable qualities in England, sorry about this, of Oliver Cromwell. So I had a lot to learn. Thank you very much, James. Yeah. I wanted just, of course, to mention the next generation. There were a couple of kids in the 1980s who, when they were driving through Donnybrook with their mother, they would be bouncing around in the car looking for Dudley walking down the road with his white hair brushed up, defeating the force of gravity, on his way to the next part of his mission in life. And Donnybrook was known to them as Dudleyland. So I bumped into their mother recently, to their mum. I bumped into her in the Royal Irish Academy, and I said to her, look, your kids are now grown up, they're in their 30s, they're in their 40s, they're running the world, very important people, but they might not like it so much that there's this little story about them jumping about in the back of the car. And she said, oh no, she said, they'll be thrilled. And there's mum sitting there, Mary Daly, so thank you. I also wanted to mention the first publishers of Irish historical studies. Thank you very much, Chiara, and your colleagues, because it was Messrs. Hodges Figgis back then in 1938 who were the first publishers. So thank you, Chiara, Tony, Fiona, and Jude. And Alice can't be here, but she was involved in an awful lot of the planning. And it was actually Hodges Figgis who gave Owen, Sara's father, his first job. And he used to work, I think it was next door, or next door could be that way, so I'm not very good on these things. He used to work there in the late 1950s, and one of his regular people that would come in and talk to him was Brendan Behan, apparently always completely sober, and would and tried to persuade Owen to sell copies of the Clare Fellow to Ruth didn't work here, but we miss you too, Ruth, tonight. And there's one other person I wanted to mention. When I was studying literature at the University of Reading, James Pollard was reading literature, and he also took a risk on me, and this book is the fourth that his small publishing house near Brighton has published. And I just wanted to go back for a second to truth unites those who seek her. Why is it that El País is talking about this year, what's happening for the 50 years? That's because General Franco died on 20th of November 1975, and El País was founded the year afterwards. So Dudley was a great European and a great internationalist, and he also used commemoration. So you can't really say, well, you can't say so-and-so would have thought this, but I'm pretty sure that Dudley would be celebrating 50 years of El País. And he very much used these commemorations himself. Rinuccini, Daniel O'Connell, 1916, to get his message over. A less famous talent of Dudley's was his journalism, which I really revelled in, as you can imagine, when I found out what a great journalist he was when I was reading his articles. Much of it was anonymous. And I have to say to you, that, to the historians here, that when history gained Dudley's heart and mind when he was about 10, it was great. It was great for you, and plus it was a loss to journalism. I can see Dudley he was a very persuasive writer, a wonderful writer, a great eye for a story, and I think he would have been a great editor. He had a real sense of judgment of the political and social issues. Anyway, I want to conclude just by saying thank you very much for being here through the years. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Telling the truth is dangerous, but I think we're going to carry on doing it. Thank
you, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's us. Neasa is going to be signing copies at the top of the desk up here now. Thank you. I thought the chairs